Okay, so here we go. So this presentation is called the Endocannabinoid System, Diving Deeper. So we're going to get into some things that really we've never talked about before. So certainly we've hinted around at some of these things, but we've never gotten into as much detail as I hope to get into today. Now, a little bit of kind of a pre-presentation talk, if you will. What I'm trying to present to you guys is our extremely advanced pharmacological concepts. So these are, in some instances, PhD level concepts that I'm trying to kind of explain, if you will. So bear with me. We might not get it right the first time. Might do a lot more videos about this because they're pretty complicated, I'll say, concepts. But in reality, they're not. And again, I would point to this slide. You know, in our world, we're all kind of driving this beat up hoopty right now because we don't understand the resources that we need to be able to feed our machine, let's say. And in the near future, we think we're going to be driving a way different vehicle because we better understand these resources that we need to feed the machine, so to speak, or fuel our vehicle, resources we need to run our bodies, okay? So as a quick review, I'm going to go through just a real quick high level of our model, and I'm going to do that kind of fast before I get into the real meat of the material that I want to present today. But if you want a review of the model, that's it there on the link. Again, if you want a copy of this presentation, if you'll send an email to just chip@newpharma or info@newpharma, be happy to provide you a copy of the presentation. And this is being videoed, obviously, and so it will be here on Facebook Live, and it'll also be up on YouTube. So anyway, let's kind of quickly recap. So how do we regulate our bodies? Well, what I was taught in high school was we regulate our bodies through hormones, right? So there's a lot of problems with that. Again, some nagging questions. What regulates the hormones? Where's the intelligence? How do you regulate your immune system? So some big holes in that theory that probably indicate that it's not a very advanced theory. So where are we at? How do we regulate our bodies? Well, again, in our world, and again, in a lot of people's world, it's looking to be that we regulate our bodies through this thing called the endocannabinoid system, right? So let's talk real quick about three major points about the endocannabinoid system. So point one about it, it's always interesting to know when we developed a system. So when did we develop legs? Would that have been an important moment in human evolution? When did we develop lungs where we could breathe air? That would be another important development in human evolution. This guy, the endocannabinoid system, we got to go way, 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 way back. And we were a little guy that lived on rocks called a sea squirt, and we had a mouth, and we had a stomach, and we had an endocannabinoid system, we had exoskeleton, and that's about it. From that guy, we diverged from insects. So insects went one way, everything else on the planet went the other, meaning we share this endocannabinoid system with most life on the planet. If you have a bird, it has an endocannabinoid system. If you have a fish, it has an endocannabinoid system. All mammals have an endocannabinoid system. It's looking like this system does the same thing for all of us. It's our master regulatory system. Point one, really old, really ancient, very common on the planet Earth, should tell us all, boing, really important, okay? Really important. Point two about it is it's looking to be our master regulatory system. So that's kind of a complicated concept. What do we mean there? We mean we kind of work like a car, right? So we understand in our car, we have a computer. That computer is always looking at every single major system in our car, trying to balance those systems, harmonize those systems, get them all to work together, because that's how we get the best gas mileage, the most life out of our car, the most, the best value out of our car. Well, guess what? Our bodies are doing the same thing. Our hypothalamus hippocampus uses the endocannabinoid system to balance systems and harmonize systems so that we're the best us that we can be, provided that we have, point three, the necessary resources to run this system, okay? So again, very old, very ancient, looking to be our master regulatory system. This system is fed by natural resources. Your fish does not smoke cannabis. He does not feed his endocannabinoid system that way. Your fish feeds his endocannabinoid system in a different way that we'll talk about in a second, but it's through natural resources, okay? All right, so let's talk about this real quick. What happens if we didn't have these natural resources? All right, so we understand about dopamine and serotonin. They're what we need to run our cognition, our thought processes, our mood, and our function, right? So without dopamine and serotonin, boop, we're a depressed Parkinson's patient. Where do dopamine and serotonin come from? Don't say anything if you know. Most people don't know. But again, L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, and they're in a lot of foods that we eat, but we have to eat L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine. And through enzyme processes, we break those down into dopamine and serotonin. And that's kind of how we build all of these resources that we need to run our body, is we break them down from higher level foods and build chemical mediators. So dopamine and serotonin are built specifically through several step process from L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine. Not really that important, kind of is, because we're going to get into that a little bit more. But the important thing is, if I put you in a box and I denied you all foods that contain L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, what do you think happens? You can't build dopamine and serotonin. You don't have the precursors. You got no juice. You got no sauce. So what happens? You crash and burn. You become a depressed Parkinson's patient. What happens when I give you L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine biscuit? Whoop, you build the resources, you come right back online. You're back to being your perfect you. That's a very important example. That's an example of natural resources and an understanding of natural resources that we need to eat to drive function in our body, okay? Guess what? Your master regulatory system, the endocannabinoid system, the thing that manages and runs and controls every single function in your body, either indirectly or directly, I didn't quite say that right, needs natural resources to function. So what happens if we don't have these natural resources? What happens if we're in an L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine box? And that's what we argue at New Pharma. That's what we're arguing as a company, is that we're deficient in our master regulatory system, and we're deficient because we don't understand the necessary resources that we need to run this system. So that's kind of the long and the short of it. You can quit here now if you'd like, but we're going to get into a little bit more detail about really what that means. But we argue that we are all deficient in this system because we just don't understand it. It's a nutritional system, and that's why we suffer from so many diseases of dysregulation. So let's talk about that a little bit. Are we suffering from endocannabinoid deficiencies? Well, what would it look like if we were? Okay, so let's look at your immune system, okay? Your immune system, arguably one of the most important systems in your body. It's what defends you against a virus, COVID-19, right? So it's what repairs traumas. So you get hit with a rock, you got a bruise, you got to heal, you got to cue stem cells, all of that, right? So again, your immune system is a very important part of our function, and it's how we defend against outside attacks and repair our body when it has been attacked or harmed in some way. Very important system. What would it look like if we were breaking in that system? Well, we'd be a lot more susceptible to viruses. Yeah. We would suffer from diseases of inflammation. 8 out of 10 of us will die of diseases of inflammation. The leading physician complaint would be, "Doc, I hurt." The leading physician complaint is, "Doc, I hurt." We die of cancers. We wouldn't be able to defend ourselves against viruses. We'd have all kinds of sicknesses from bacteria and things that we just couldn't fight off anymore. That's happening, folks. That's happening because we don't understand the resources that we need to put in our body to build and run our immune system properly, okay? So anyway, you can, cognitive, is it happening in cognitive? Feeding and craving, how we feed and nourish our body. Do we have autoimmunes? Do we have diabetes, type 2 diabetes, Crohn's disease, IBS? Issues of the gut, feeding and craving. We're breaking in every conceivable way, just depending on your genetics. Where are you weakest? That's where you're going to break until we understand until we understand our L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine box. Okay, so again, let's drill into this a little bit more. The L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine example. what is disease? I mean, a disease is just a dysregulation. It's an abnormal condition. It's a flux in the matrix. That's all a disease is. It's just a dysregulation inside of you. Diseases of dysregulation would highly indicate endocannabinoid solutions, okay? So are we suffering from endocannabinoid deficiencies? Again, when we really begin to understand this system and how this system can be affected by cannabis, yes, but also by just natural products and natural resources, oh my gosh, you know, do interesting things come in line, right? So can and do natural resources affect this system? Yes. And can we use these natural resources to manipulate this system? Yes, we can. Absolutely, we can. And again, ask anybody who's a medical cannabis patient about that, because they'll tell you they can and they do. And that's exactly what they're doing. Okay. So that's kind of a recap of our model, if you will. We're going to get into the new material now. So all of that, if you want a deeper dive, go look up the video. Again, we've done some other videos about some other things that you can find out on YouTube. So let's just talk about cannabis real quick. Why does cannabis work, right? So why does cannabis have medical value? Well, cannabis can completely span this entire endocannabinoid umbrella, if you will. So an indica is characterized by high CBD, low THC, which again, in neurological influence would affect your CB2 neuroreceptors over your CB1 neuroreceptors. The sativa is the complete opposite as to effect. Again, it is going to be characterized by high THC, and it will have high influence at CB1 neuroreceptors. This is why and how cannabis can manipulate this entire umbrella. So THC to CBD ratios moves you up and down the slider, and terpenes absolutely play in that profile too. But for simplicity, let's just talk about THC and CBD. But again, how you move up and down across that umbrella, and you're getting different medical effect because you're manipulating CB1 and CB2s in a different way, and you're also doing some other things that we'll talk about in a second. So as you can see, though, the endocannabinoid system sits above and function all these other systems, and it's a way to manipulate these other systems under the endocannabinoid system. But let's talk about natural products. Can you do the same thing with natural products? Absolutely you can. So there's a molecule, it's in cannabis, it's in black pepper, it's in black cumin, it's in a lot of things, called beta caryophyllene. It completely stimulates the CB2 neuroreceptor. There's another molecule that's in something called kava, called yanganin, and it completely stimulates CB1. So again, if you're an engineer, guess what? Be careful, because we have patents, but again, we have some of this patented, but you can engineer up and down this entire spectrum, okay? And you can do that with natural products, you can do that with cannabis, you can do that with a lot of things. But we don't, you know, there's got to be more to the story here, right? Because your fish and your bird and your dog, they don't smoke cannabis, so they're not getting kind of that natural modulation that you might get from cannabis. And they can't engineer natural products, right, for effect across this system. So they can't build a supplement, if you will, to attenuate this system, but they still have to balance their body. They still have to feed this system. They still have to feed this system with natural resources. So how does it work for them? I mean, you know, that's really interesting, right? You know, they're getting their L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine endocannabinoid wise, perhaps in a different way than we are, or perhaps an unknown way that we're going to explore a little bit. Okay. So we're going to talk about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. And if you guys have ever heard me talk before, you've heard me talk a lot about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids are 100% the precursors for the endocannabinoid system. So again, what is the L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine in the endocannabinoid system? It's omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, okay? So we gotta have omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. What about omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids? How important are they? Well, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, this is really, if you're a spiritual person, to me, this is really kind of godly and, intelligent design, if you will. Our master regulatory system appears to be fed by the only two things our bodies can't make. So our bodies can't make two things that we have to have. They're called polyunsaturated fatty acids and omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. We have to have these, and we have to have them in balance, as we'll see in a second, which we don't have, but we have to have these things because they feed our master regulatory system. So the only two things our bodies can't make, we need to fuel our master regulatory system. Isn't that cool? I mean, it really is cool, but it's a tool that I could use to break you too, which is sadly, and I don't think anybody's done this purposefully, but it certainly looks like, this ratio and balance has been upset, and that's part of really what's wrong with us as a society. But anyway, omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, our bodies can't make them. We've got to take them in from outside sources, and we use them in all of these really cool ways, okay? So what happens if we have too many omega-6s? And this is exactly the situation in our diet. Right now, our Western diet is somewhere between 1 to 15 and 1 to 20 in omega-3 to omega-6 input. So what happens if you take in too many omega-6s? Well, omega-6s are what build anandamide. Omega-6s are what build 2-AG, right? So it creates a situation where you have too many endocannabinoids, right? So if you eat too many omega-6s, it looks like that gives you way too many endocannabinoids, and you've got too much noise to be able to control your body well. And this results in health concerns, right? So again, I can feed you a bunch of omega-6 fatty acids and you will break in a very, very predictable way. You will not be able to mediate inflammation. Again, 80% of us will die of inflammation. Guess what? We're eating too many omega-6s. Kind of should be obvious, right? Okay, well, this is another interesting thing. So omega-3s, generally, when we eat them in the food supply, are in the form of something called alpha linoleic acid, which breaks down into EPA and DHA. I can't really say the names of them, epicatic acid, something like that, EPA, DHA. But anyway, as you eat omega-3s, your ALA is being broken down into EPA. For some reason, EPA decreases your circulating endocannabinoids. So you eat too many omega-6s, you get too many endocannabinoids. Eat omega-3s, your endocannabinoids go down. That's a ring the bell, Jimmy, the moment. Ring the bell, Jimmy. That's interesting, right? Those are fascinating anomalies. Fascinating anomalies. Let's just conjecture a little bit. Omega-6s build endocannabinoids. Omega-3s build receptor sites. What happens if you got plenty of receptor sites? Do you have too many of these? No, you don't, because your receptor sites are hydrolyzing them, okay? Fascinating anomaly, right? Interesting. So how does our body deal with these fatty acids? Let's talk about this a little bit. So again, as we take in these fatty acids, we actually have two different receptor sites that deal with fatty acids. One receptor site is called free fatty acid receptor site. We'll talk about that in a second. PPARs are really interesting. So PPARs are expressed in our tissues, all in our adipose tissues, in our stomachs, in the linings of our intestinal walls, in our livers, basically anywhere where we're taking in nutrients or potentially have the ability to take in an acid, fatty acid. So PPARs are a very important entry point for fatty acids. Again, it's looking like PPARs are stimulated with omega-3 fatty acids, which is fascinating. So you can see fatty acid derivatives as future PPAR dual agonists. You have DHA and EPA. So ALA breaks down into DHA and EPA and basically hits these receptor sites, creating other effect, okay? So do we really know everything that we need to know about the endocannabinoid system? These PPAR receptor sites are also activated by endocannabinoids, by anandamide. So potentially PPAR could be a potential future receptor for the endocannabinoid system, because something happens at kind of a higher level above the endocannabinoid system with these fatty acids that activate things in the endocannabinoid system, okay? All right, let's talk a little bit about omega-3 and omega-6 ratios. Dr. Simopoulos, thank you so much for your work. Dr. Artemis Simopoulos is a lady that is in her 90s, I would assume now. She did landmark work on omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids and ratios way back in the 90s, long time ago. She really did the preeminent work on the Mediterranean diet that kind of proved, why the Mediterranean diet was so beneficial. But I want you, when you have a second, or if you have a second now, just read part of this paragraph that I have up here, because I'm going to pull out some things. So right now in our Western diet, there is a ratio of 15 to 1 to 16, 17 or so to 1 of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. So she has done landmark work, again, on what happens as you dysregulate these two things. So if you take in more omega-6s than omega-3s, what happens? So her argument was kind of the paleo diet, if you will, that we need to be on 1-to-1. So again, we need to be taking in as many omega-3s as we do omega-6s. But if you look at how we begin to break, when we disproportionate this ratio, I mean, you can see. So again, women with breast cancer, there's things on there, rheumatoid arthritis. Once you get above about 10 to 1, you really start breaking. So 10 to 1 to 20 to 1 is kind of just this epic fail of our immune system and feeding and craving system and cognitive systems, and kind of almost exactly what we see in society. So that's kind of what's going on there. But our endocannabinoid deficiencies. So again, I just pointed out these various ways that we are deficient in this endocannabinoid system. Okay, so again, it's looking like there's a lot of smoke here to indicate that we're not running properly our immune system. We're not running properly our feeding and craving system. We're not running properly our, cognitive systems, right? So it may not be an endocannabinoid deficiency in the way that we think. It's probably a deficiency in endocannabinoid receptor sites more than anything else. But it's looking like omega-3s are how we build those receptor sites. So that's very exciting news, right? So that's really kind of a cool thing. That's a, oh my, really cool moment if we're right. Let's explore this a little deeper. So omega-3s and another free fatty acid receptor called GPR120. What does this guy do? Well, it turns out, again, if we're right here, there would be a lot of smoke in a lot of different ways. For instance, like obesity. So we don't have obesity figured out. It has to do with inflammation, no question. It has to do with endocannabinoid dysregulation. Obese people have way too many endocannabinoids. But there's something going on there that we're not figuring out. And again, if you look at our diet, we're not getting the amount of omega-3s that we need to. So what do these omega-3s do inside of our body? So that, again, they enter as far as obesity goes and as far as insulin goes, they enter at GPR120, and they help us regulate how we eat, how we basically get the feedback on if we've gotten enough nutrients or not, okay? Again, what is the relationship of the omega-3s and free fatty acids and GPR120? It's how they get in you, right? And so you can read through this a little bit more, but I'm just citing studies here and showing you kind of that there's a lot of smoke here that would indicate that we're onto something. So here's a really thing that we hear a lot in society, and I want to make this distinction because this is really important. High fat diet, right? So you can read, high fat diet is thought to be kind of the worst thing in the world here, and, identified with a lot of different disease states. But is that high fat diet indicative of high omega-3 or high omega-6 fat? Because that's important. That's very important. Again, if it's too much omega-6 fat, when let's say the powers that be, when pharma, when they talk about a high fat diet, they're talking about a fat cube that's mainly omega-6s and has a little bit of omega-3s in it. And is that good for you? No, it's not, because we've just showed you 100 ways why it's not. It's bad for your endocannabinoid system. It dysregulates you. We've shown you, how that really causes disease state. But let's talk about this a little bit more. So again, fat, right? Where does fat come from? Well, fat comes from our meat sources. And if our meat sources were disbalanced, omega-3, omega-6, then that fat that we're eating from that meat is going to be equally disbalanced. So again, if we eat a high-fat diet and we're eating disbalanced meat, disbalanced fat, that does us no good. That might, in fact, do us more harm than good. If we ate meat that was more omega-3 heavy than omega-6 heavy, now we get into some real interesting things. Now we get into some health benefits of that meat. Literally, that meat could almost be like a medicine. Now, one of the cool things is, how do you turn this ratio around in animals? Well, the way that you turn this ratio around in animals is to feed them hemp. So when you begin to feed hemp to beef, they go from an omega-6 heavy situation to a balanced situation. When you begin to do that to pork and to poultry, same thing happens. Again, in some cases, you get more omega-3 fat in the fat than you do omega-6. So this is a pretty easy problem, as a society really to fix, okay? Basically, what I'm telling you guys is that the reason that we're so diseased is because we're just disbalanced, omega-3, omega-6, all right? When you eat fat, you store that fat as future energy. So again, if you're eating bad fat from meat sources that have dysregulated omega-3 and omega-6 ratios, then you're putting that bad fat into you for storage. And again, you're going to have a disbalanced ratio. Now, you can offset this fat situation with supplementation. So again, you can supplement with omega-3 heavy things. I would suggest you not supplement with fish oil, frankly. I would suggest that you supplement with things that are high in alpha linoleic acid, because your body needs to do that work to break that down into those two things, and that's important. You can also read about the benefits, the health benefits of omega-3s, because they're all over the place. But what I'm telling you is this is the why behind why omega-3s are so beneficial, and it's because we're just disbalance. We bring ourselves into balance, man, we're going to be healthy and we're going to live a long time. Okay. The other thing that I want to show you is the data is kind of obscure. And again, we're talking about high level pharmacological concepts here, high level neurological concepts, how your body breaks down things with enzymes and all of that. So it's, somewhat tough sledding once you get in there. But what I want to point out to you is that for the most part, every single thing that you need to run your body is going to have a genesis in a fatty acid. So it might not be in a PUFA, it might not be in omega-3 or omega-6, but it might be in a breakdown of those, or a breakdown of those, or a breakdown of those. So we build these chemical mediators from these higher level fats. And again, it's L-tryptophan I used as an example. L-tyrosine is pretty easy to map out, but I used L-tryptophan as an example. I used dopamine and serotonin as an example. So over here on the kind of right-hand side, the blue text, that's how you build dopamine. So you'll see you have something called L-phenyl, whatever that is, right? But that L-phenylalanine, that will come at some point up in the chain, it will have a genesis too from a free fatty acid, okay? So these free fatty acid, from a free fatty acid, okay? So these fatty acids, which all have their genesis in omega-3 and omega-6, are what our bodies use as fuel and to break down all these chemical mediators. And again, we have to have enzyme processes that go along with this, but this is how we work. L-tryptophan is a tough one to figure out where it comes from, but it does eventually come from a free fatty acid. So again, what have we learned? I just gave you a whole bunch of information that, you know, again, it's probably so much information that it'll have to be processed several times. I'm still processing this information and still trying to kind of map out these things. But basically, you have this endocannabinoid system that spans really all across human function. And it's how we manage and regulate our bodies. Okay, so we use this endocannabinoid system to manage and regulate our bodies. But it's got to have resources. It's got to have resources to run. Where do those resources come from? Well, it's looking like we have kind of this other layer on top of it that's kind of this free fatty acid layer that builds all these resources that sort of funnel down into chemical mediators and how we work. Kind of complicated, but the cool thing is we balance this top level. We're healthy, man. We are uber healthy. And it's disbalanced now. And again, when it's disbalanced, we can point to a lot of things of how we're not healthy. So there's a lot of smoke there, okay? So hopefully you're getting it. Hopefully you got it. Again, you can go through this. What have we learned? You know, but this is sort of the ups and downs of omega-3, omega-6, how it affects circulating endocannabinoids, and basically the health effects. Thank you guys very much. I really enjoyed presenting this with you today. We are going to go ahead and stop it there. Again, if you have questions, feel free to leave the questions in the thread and I'll get to them. Thank you guys very much.